So today, we're unpacking a transcript by creator Johann Kassim, and it details his massive, I mean, truly massive, 10-volume epic fantasy saga called Autherens.
It's a huge undertaking. 10 volumes is no joke.
Right. And the mission for this deep dive is to really explore what's being called a brand new mythic paradigm. We're looking at how this incredibly ambitious work attempts to completely rewrite the established rules of traditional fantasy.
Absolutely. It tries to better reflect our modern, psychologically complex world.
Exactly. And we know you love diving into new perspectives without feeling bogged down by information overload. So consider this your shortcut into a fascinating, just wildly original literary and philosophical universe.
It really is a wild universe. Kassim is basically asking us to examine the foundational architecture of the stories we've been telling ourselves for the last century and then, completely invert them.
Totally. And to give you a sense of what that actually means, I want you to imagine the classic fantasy world you already know. Like, think about opening a Tolkien book and looking at the map of Middle-earth.
Or exploring the grounds of Hogwarts, right?
Yeah, exactly. Usually there is this expectation of geographical precision. The author draws a line and says, okay, here are the dangerous mountains, and over here are the safe green valleys.
Right. The geography is static.
But I want you to imagine what those worlds would look like if their magic systems, their landscapes, their very existence were completely governed by modern therapy and trauma psychology.
That changes the baseline entirely. Because in a traditional epic, the ground under your feet is solid. It's fixed.
Right.
And that's deeply comforting because we, as readers know, we want things categorized. We want to know exactly where the boundaries of good and evil are drawn before the adventure even begins.
But stepping into Kassim's universe, that familiar map just catches fire. It melts and rearranges itself based on, say, how deeply a protagonist regrets a past mistake.
Which is such a crazy concept.
It is. We're looking at a cosmological landscape that is entirely fluid.
And to really appreciate how revolutionary that fluidity is, we have to look at what the Autherens is reacting against. Kassim specifically points to the big three of modern fantasy.
Okay, so that's J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, and J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, the heavy hitters. And they all built their worlds on highly stable, but, very different foundations.
Let's actually look at how they differ, because Kassim is pulling away from all of them.
Okay, so take Tolkien. He gives us what academics call stable ontologies and mythopoetic linguistics.
Oh, wait, hold on. Let's translate that for a second. Stable ontologies, meaning the world exists objectively, regardless of who is observing it.
Precisely. Tolkien's universe is governed by an ancient, divine, and unmoving order. A mountain is a mountain because it was forged by divine beings. It doesn't care about your feelings.
Right. And mythopoetic linguistics, that refers to his creation of functional languages like Elvish before he even wrote the actual stories, right?
Exactly. The language is historically rooted. It's solid. But then you have C.S. Lewis, whose metaphysics are entirely moral.
Driven by Christian allegory, yeah.
Right. The magic of Narnia operates on these absolute laws of divine justice and redemption. It's a moral universe.
And finally, Rowling, who grounds her magic within social and institutional structures.
Yeah, it's like a magical realism that relies on ministries and secret societies. Magic is a tool. It's governed by bureaucratic rules that you study in a classroom.
Right, you pass a test to use it. But Kassim abandons all of that. He drops the ancient divine order, the moral allegory, and the bureaucratic magic.
He just throws it all out.
Yeah. Instead, he introduces what the transcript calls a postmodern psycho-spiritual cosmology.
It is a mouthful.
It is. But it basically means the metaphysics of the Autherens aren't an objective landscape at all. They operate as an expanded consciousness.
Right.
So instead of magic originating from an ancient wand or a divine creator, the environment itself is literally reacting to the characters.
Yeah.
My initial thought was to compare it to a giant mood ring.
A mood ring.
Yeah, but, a mood ring just passively changes color. This feels more like a universe built on tectonic plates, where those plates are literally made of human emotion.
Oh, that tectonic plate analogy captures the mechanics perfectly.
Yeah.
In Kassim's universe, emotional states, moral failures, relational fractures, they all carry immense gravitational weight.
They directly reshape reality.
Exactly. To give you a mechanical sense of this, if a character experiences profound, earth-shattering grief, the physical realm they are standing in might literally split into multiple navigable layers.
Wow. Wait, how does a character even interact with this realm like that? Do they have to physically climb out of their own depression?
In a way, yes, they actually do. Navigating the world requires psychological processing.
That's wild.
A character can't just, walk north to escape a grief-fractured landscape. They have to integrate the emotion or find someone whose empathetic energy stabilizes the ground they're walking on.
Which completely shifts the entire fantasy genre. It's no longer an external adventure like walking a magical ring to a volcano.
Right, no Mount Doom here.
It becomes an internal psychological navigation where your emotional state dictates the physics of the physical space around you.
And the mechanics of how emotion alters reality here are just staggering. The transcript outlines trauma as a literal metaphysical law.
Yeah, it says emotional breakdown manifests as collapsing palaces.
Which is such a vivid image. Jealousy can literally collapse a heaven. Betrayal generates entire hell worlds.
This fundamentally changes the nature of the antagonist in a fantasy story, doesn't it? Because usually fantasy externalizes evil.
Oh, absolutely. Think of Sauron in dark armor leading an army, or the White Witch freezing Narnia because she is objectively wicked.
Or Dolores Umbridge in Harry Potter. Cruelty hidden behind bureaucratic decrees and pink cardigans.
Right, but it's always external. Somebody else is the bad guy. Kasim internalizes the evil. Sin and sorrow aren't villains you can punch with a sword.
Right.
They are energetic fields.
Which makes me wonder, if evil is just an energetic field born from a bad breakup or personal guilt, how does a hero actually fight that?
That's the real question.
Like, what does an action scene look like if there's no Dark Lord to defeat?
Well, the action is the agonizing work of emotional integration and awareness. You don't defeat an energetic field of sorrow with violence.
You can't just stab your depression.
Exactly. You dismantle it through realization and connection. Kasim argues this makes the work distinctly 21st century. It is psychologically literate.
Yeah, like love, for instance, isn't a romantic subplot tacked onto the side of a war story. Love is cosmic architecture.
The transcript gives some great specific examples of this, actually. The love between the characters Gada and Anasandra literally shapes heavenly geography.
Oh, wow.
But on the flip side, you have Empha. Her devotion is tied to deep shame and trauma, which triggers a demonic transformation.
And tying that back to what we just discussed about the mechanics of this world, her longing for connection actually alters the physical fate of the worlds around her.
Yeah, it's really tragic.
It feels like a very stark metaphor for how our own unresolved trauma can isolate us and inadvertently harm the people we're really trying to love.
It is a devastatingly human portrayal of magic. And Kasim applies this exact same psychological realism to the gods of this universe, too.
Right. The divine beings here are not idealized, perfect entities sitting on clouds passing judgment.
Not at all. They are deeply traumatized protagonists themselves. The divine dysfunction is basically the narrative engine of the entire saga.
Yeah, we're introduced to a universe born from the death of its creator, Autherens, right? An emperor described as jealous, insecure, and unstable.
His death literally begets the universe. And then there's Gracious, an emperor whose fractured identity and guilt physically reform the landscape of hell.
It's just so heavy. But amidst all this heavy psychological trauma and collapsing architecture, we also have Quickham.
Oh, yes, we have to mention Quickham.
A vampiric trickster guardian who represents exquisite instability and happens to be a duck.
Yes, a vampire duck.
I just love that so much.
Kasim really balances the intense metaphysical weight with these moments of sheer absurdity. It keeps the philosophy grounded and prevents the narrative from just collapsing under its own psychological gravity.
It definitely paints a picture of a very messy afterlife. Because reading about the topology of these realms, it clearly isn't a simple binary of a symbolic heaven for the good and a fiery hell for the bad.
Right, it's way more complex.
The transcript mentions places like Garantella, which it calls the falling realm, and Mount Helis's magma caverns alongside these false lecture hall heavens.
And if you look closely at how Kasim structures these realms, you notice they aren't moral hierarchies.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, in something like Dante's Inferno, a soul is placed in a specific circle as a direct punishment for a specific sin committed in life. It's a moral judgment.
Right, you stole, so you go here.
Exactly. But Kasim's realms are experiential, emotional diagnostics.
So, someone in Garantella isn't falling because they broke a divine law. They're falling because that environment physically reflects their internal sensation of spiraling out of control.
Exactly. It's this surreal gradation of psychology made physical.
Yeah.
Your internal weather becomes the actual geographical weather you have to walk through.
That is fascinating. But this concept of messy, emotional, flawed gods who throw tantrums and alter reality, it actually has pretty deep historical roots.
It does. It's not entirely new.
Right. To understand why Kasim's cosmology feels so relevant to our current cultural moment, the transcript suggests we need to look way backward to ancient history.
Kasim explicitly compares the Autherens to pre-Christian Greco-Roman polytheism. Like if you read Homer or Hesiod, the gods of Olympus operate in this exact same manner.
They feel first and they rule second.
Yes. Zeus rages, Apollo destroys cities on a whim, Hera gets jealous. They are petty, vindictive, and extremely emotionally volatile.
And Paradiso, the divine realm in Kasim's universe, it operates much more like Mount Olympus than an Abrahamic heaven.
Completely. It's full of shifting alliances, betrayals, fractured families.
Yeah, power is based on prestige, charm, and emotional dominance rather than moral purity. The gods fall, they change, they resurrect, like Gracious goes mad and becomes Kashwani. It's a classic cycle of dismemberment and rebirth.
And what Kasim is arguing here is that this ancient, messy, polytheistic dynamic is actually a perfect mirror for our modern era.
How so?
Well, we're currently living through a collapse of monolithic, centralized frameworks. Hundreds of years ago, in the West at least, there was one dominant religious narrative.
Right.
But today, we live in a society that is highly secularized, yet intensely spiritual at the same time. It is very individualized.
Yeah, people are mixing traditions. Like someone might go to therapy on Tuesday, consult their astrology chart on Wednesday, pull tarot cards on Thursday, and then practice Buddhist meditation on Friday.
Exactly. There is no grand single narrative anymore. Truth has become decentralized.
And morality is often evaluated based on psychological needs and relational loyalty rather than, a strict set of divine commandments.
And ancient people didn't have the vocabulary of modern psychology. So when they experienced an overwhelming destructive rage, they externalized it and called it Aries.
Wow, right.
When they felt an uncontrollable, chaotic desire, they called it Aphrodite. They used gods as metaphors for the massive internal storms of human interiority.
So today, we don't say Poseidon is brooding. We say, I'm grappling with my shadow self, or I need to heal my inner child.
Exactly. We treat psychological archetypes with the exact same symbolic reverence that the ancients treated their deities.
And that makes a saga like the Autherens just perfectly timed for today's zeitgeist. We are a society that intimately understands the language of trauma and emotional volatility.
Yes, we speak that language fluently now.
A fantasy world governed by those exact forces feels deeply relatable because, as Kasim argues, today's generation is a wounded world seeking wounded gods.
You no longer relate to flawless, morally perfect beings.
Yeah, we really don't. We relate to the struggle.
And that concept actually leads us right into the core philosophy of the entire 10-volume saga.
Yeah, because we've explored the world building and the historical parallels, but the transcript also outlines Kasim's ultimate thesis in what he calls the Autherens Manifesto.
Right. This manifesto is the profound why behind the entire project. It explicitly rejects a foundational assumption that has dominated storytelling and theology for centuries.
Which is?
The idea that perfection fell into imperfection.
Well, like the classic narrative of Eden, the idea that everything was flawless, a mistake was made, humanity fell, and now we basically spend all of existence trying to claw our way back to that lost state of perfection.
Exactly. Kasim completely reverses that. In the Autherens, brokenness births beauty. Wounds create worlds.
That's a huge shift.
It is. Imperfection isn't something that ruined the cosmos. It is the essential raw material required to build a better one.
Because of that cosmological law, the people considered lowly, rejected, or meek become the prototypes of new universes.
And Kasim is very careful to define the meek, not as passive or weak, but as those who are fiercely mindful, deeply aware of suffering, and who actively choose to lead with empathy.
The manifesto actually directly attacks the modern stigma of weakness. Like it elevates the recovering addict, for example.
Yes, that's a great example from the text.
The person who has hit absolute rock bottom, who has experienced what Kasim terms stupidness, but does the agonizing work of recovery, that person is viewed as a saint in this universe.
They are elevated far above the flawless person who has just lived a sheltered life and never failed.
Because a civilization that praises perfection inherently hides trauma, right? It forces people to silence their struggle.
Exactly. Kasim's cosmology offers what we could call a literature of mercy. It suggests that what breaks you becomes the very thing that builds a better world.
The transcript even connects this to historical figures, pointing out that Prophet Muhammad was an orphaned, rejected child.
Right. And regardless of your personal theology, Kassim uses this to highlight a universal pattern. The individuals who spark massive paradigm-shifting change are rarely those born into comfortable, flawless power.
They're the outcasts, the wounded. I do want to push back on this a bit, though. If we say that brokenness births beauty, and we elevate the traumatized as the ultimate creators of the universe, does Kassim's philosophy run the risk of romanticizing suffering?
That's a very fair question.
Because we see this sometimes in art, where the tortured artist trope makes it seem like you absolutely need to be in agony to create something worthwhile. Is he just glorifying trauma?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and it brings up how this universe views healing. Kassim isn't arguing that suffering is inherently good, or that characters should go out and seek trauma.
Okay, good.
He's arguing that once trauma occurs, it shouldn't be treated as a source of shame that disqualifies you from greatness. Healing, in the context of the Autherens, is not returning to a state of unblemished perfection.
It's not erasing the scar.
Right. It's not pretending it never happened. It's taking the raw, chaotic energy of that specific pain and choosing to architect something entirely new with it.
So it's not about staying broken. It's about acknowledging that the broken pieces are the only building blocks you have left, so you might as well build a universe with them.
Precisely. The shame, the grief, the rejection, these aren't tragic flaws that a hero needs to simply get over. They're heroic signatures.
Oh.
There's a quote in the text from the Sufi mystic Rumi that fits this perfectly. The cracked places are where the soul emanates. Wounds are not evidence of failure. They are the evidence of becoming.
The manifesto ends with this incredible rallying cry. It says, "We, the broken, are the womb of all future worlds. We are the children of imperfection and the parents of whatever greatness is to come."
It's powerful stuff. Ultimately, what Kassim provides here is way more than an escapist fantasy story. It is an anthropology.
Yeah, it really is.
It's a spiritual psychology masked as a 10-volume epic. By externalizing our deepest psychological struggles into cosmic events, he basically forces the reader to look at their own internal landscape with more reverence.
It demands that we reconsider how we judge the imperfect people in our lives and really how we view ourselves.
Absolutely.
And for you listening, thinking about how to apply this to your own life, how does this framework change the way you view your own past failures?
Or the times you felt completely shattered.
Yeah. If we look at things through Kassim's lens, those weren't the moments you ruined your map. Those were the moments you gathered the materials to start drawing a new one. We spend so much energy trying to hide the cracks, right? Pretending we are whole and unbroken.
But if the cracks are the only places where new worlds can take root, then hiding them is actually a refusal to create.
Such a great point. At the start of this deep dive, we talked about the maps you find in classic fantasy novels. Rigid, precise, and fixed in ink.
Right, the safe maps.
But stepping out of the Autherens, that old map feels entirely inadequate. It doesn't account for the human element, for the shifting tectonic plates of our own emotions. So we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today.
Think about your own internal emotional states right now.
Your quiet griefs, your lingering longings, the unresolved conflicts you carry, or your profound joys. If those internal states were literally the architectural blueprints for a physical universe, what kind of world would you be living in today?